The other one. Well, thanks, Linda. You know, the true story of Whoops has never been told. A lot of people came to interview me and say they were going to write the book. And the only book that got written really was not very conclusive. There were just some extraordinary events in that. It was, at the time, the largest public bond default in the history of the United States, obviously subsequently eclipsed by the savings and loan crisis and then by the Wall Street crash in 2008. But at the time, it was a really big deal. And there was, it's a long story, I won't go into it now, but there were some extraordinary events, but I'll just relate two. We're in discovery, and I have a local attorney from Springfield, Bob Ackerman, is lead counsel, and then we got Martha Walters, and she was working for a larger firm, but she was representing the grand city of Drain, and who was also a participant in Whoops. And we were doing discovery, and they go up to the Whoops headquarters, and they had their, in those days, file cabinets in a room about the size of a gymnasium, and they said, well, just go right ahead, but there's no index. But ultimately, we found that all of the opinions by lawyers representing PUDs, municipals, and co-ops were identical. And of course, they're all covered by different laws in Oregon. So how could they all be identical? And they were all signed off on. But so there were a whole lot of issues about how this had all come forward. And you know, the ultimate decision that we won in the circuit court, Judge Woodward shocked the heck out of people. The head lawyer for Whoops, I think, passed out during the call when the judge announced his preliminary ruling. And you know, subsequently, you know, the Supreme Court preempted the case on a Friday, and it was going to be heard in the appeals court on Monday, and then quickly rendered an opinion, which ultimately whitewashed the whole thing. There were a lot of lawyers in Oregon who probably would have been disbarred had that gone forward. That story's never been told. The other one was the chief counsel for Whoops, their chief bond counsel in New York, who had written this opinion that everybody used. When they went to depose him, he was under psychiatric care and couldn't be interviewed. So the resolution ultimately was we get out from under the debt, but the path there was very crooked, to put it mildly. So thanks for reminding me of that. I've got to do. I got Bob Ackerman on tape on a good part of the story, and I should do my own version too. Linda also reminded me something else, and apparently sometimes when I speak it makes a difference. And she said that the league has just rendered this report on hard rock mining in Oregon. And this has been something of a cause with me since I got to Congress. We're living under the Mining Act of 1872. Ulysses S. Grant was President of the United States. We had this vast wasteland in the West that was unsettled, and we wanted to encourage people to move there. So a law was written that basically gave away precious mineral rights for virtually nothing. But that unfortunately prevails till today. In 2019, twice in the House was passed hard rock mining reform, and twice it was blocked in the Senate. I expect we may pass it again in this Congress. It'll probably meet the same fate in the Senate. Hopefully after the next election we can change that. But you know, it's a scandal both in terms of the impacts on the environment, and it's a scandal in terms of us giving away tens of billions of dollars of depletable precious assets for nothing to foreign corporations for the most part, who are engaged in mining. And there's no other nation on earth that allows this. Everybody else charges royalties, and that's a key part of the reform, in addition to imposing environmental rules and bonding, because I have a mine that still isn't cleaned up. There's two of them in my district that are on the Superfund site, and I don't know when we'll ever get them cleaned up, because the companies, you know, were shell companies that went bankrupt, and they just left a total mess. So, and they're polluting rivers. So I can look forward to reading this report. And because there's things we can do within the state, too, to deal with some of these abuses. Well, let me what I've been doing this week, and I'm trying to, and I'm sure the league will be interested in this, too, although you've taken positions certainly before, on healthcare. I've been going around reminding people of where we were before the Affordable Health Care Act, where we are today, and where we might be in the not too distant future, dependent upon a court decision. And just recently, the Trump administration took an extraordinary position as he ordered the Justice Department to join litigants in Texas to declare the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional and repeal it in its entirety. And he said, don't worry, we're going to be the party of health care, we'll have a better plan. Then Mitch McConnell said, we're not working on that. So now he's saying that he will have a great plan after the election. It'll be better than what we have today. And that just sort of triggered something in my mind. I thought, Richard Milhouse Nixon planned to end the war in Vietnam. Trust me, we elected him. I didn't, but people elected him. And he didn't have a plan to end the war, and it didn't end until his second term. So I don't think we should be betting on that. But we need to remind people, and when I've done these town halls, I've had experts there, and particularly the people who work in community, CCOs, community centers, federally qualified health centers, the county people, and the numbers are extraordinary. In Benton County in Lane County yesterday, I was in Benton also, the uninsured rate used to be 16% in Lane County. It's now 4%. So that's a lot of people. And in my district, my 4th congressional district, which is rather large, sprawling, all the way down to the California border and up to Sweet Home, I have the 5th largest number of people on expanded Medicaid of the 435 districts in the United States. Now, that's not percent, 5th absolute number. My district is a little larger because our state's growing, but still it's extraordinary. And Greg Walden from Eastern Oregon has the 2nd largest number, and that's because Oregon has done an extraordinary job with outreach and the Oregon Health Plan in getting people signed up for health care. And it has obviously saved lives. It's improved their health. It's improved the economy because many of these people wouldn't have been able to keep working without health care. It's absolutely essential. It's actually lowered health care costs for all the rest of us, because when someone goes to the hospital and they don't have health insurance, someone's got to pay the bill. And most of the time we're talking about people who don't have assets that are adequate, although before the Affordable Care Act, the most frequent cause of bankruptcy in the United States of America was an uninsured health emergency. I had a friend, a very good friend, who was the CFO years ago at McKenzie Willamette, and one day he said, I just quit. And I said, Steve, why'd you quit? You loved your job. He says, I got tired of taking away people's houses. That's the way it used to be. And unfortunately, we could go back there with a total repeal. So, pre-existing conditions. There are 133 million Americans with pre-existing conditions. In my congressional district alone, 312,000 people, including me, and probably a few of you here in this room. And it used to be we were uninsurable, or we'll give you a policy, but it's going to exclude this and it's going to cost this, which made it essentially uninsurable. No longer can that happen. We have over 2 million young adults, 28,000 in Oregon, between 19 and 26, are just starting their working lives or in college, have health insurance who didn't have health insurance previously. We also, with Medicaid, if we lost that, and a lot of people, and part of the reason I'm going around doing this, most of you probably know it, but there were a lot of people in my district. Hillary only won my district by 554 votes. So there are a lot of people in my district who are on expanded Medicaid who hate Obamacare. If I talk to them, Obamacare is horrible. And I say, well, you're on the Oregon Health Plan, right? Yeah, I said, and you're on expanded Medicaid under the Oregon Health Plan. That's Obamacare. And it's a tough message for people, but it's true. So I'm going around holding these town halls to educate people as to what is really at risk, and it's extraordinary. Now, that's not to say that the ACA is a perfect piece of legislation. In fact, I was one of the last people to agree to vote for it because we had a much better bill in the House. We had, instead of state-by-state exchanges, we had national exchanges, meaning huge groups of people, lower premiums. We had a national not-for-profit government-run exchange, which I believe would have demonstrated to people what Medicare for All could be or what single payer could be. And we took away the antitrust immunity of the health insurance industry. They can and they do collude to set rates or operate in different markets and not compete with one another. That's all legal under a law passed before I was born by Congress. And we changed that in the House bill. But all those things went away with the Senate bill. And we didn't get to have a real legislative process because we had a great bill. The Senate had a not so great bill, the charitable. And then Teddy Kennedy died, and it was either take the Senate bill or do nothing. And with 56 million Americans uninsured, I didn't feel we could do nothing. But I said, we're going to have to fix this. As soon as we pass it, we need to start working on fixing this because there's a lot of problems with it. A big problem for us here in Oregon is that we get some of the lowest Medicare reimbursements in the United States of America, which means a lot of physicians are not really thrilled with the idea of taking someone who's on Medicare, and people who are on Medicare can have a difficult time finding a physician who will accept them, primary care provider. And that's because when the Medicare Act was passed, back when LBJ was president, they looked around the country and they set the rates according to what medical costs were in the different regions of the country. And we were really inexpensive, and New York and Florida were relatively high. And what's happened over time is that we've never reviewed the formula. So all we've done is increase it by percentage. So if you start higher and you give the same percent to both, what happens is now for a given procedure in Florida, a Medicare reimbursement might be 3 times what it is per physician in Oregon. But it's outrageous and it's wasteful. We are one of there's 17 states that are known as quality care providers, and we formed a coalition during the consideration of the Affordable Care Act and said you have to address our concerns in this legislation. And the House bill did, the Senate bill didn't. And so there were a number of us in the coalition said, wait a minute, you're going to pass this, and this isn't going to work so well for our people. You're not going to fix the Medicare reimbursement rate. And Kathleen Sebelius, who was then the head of HHS, they were getting concerned because it was going to be a very close vote. And there were about 8 of us holding out and saying, you got to fix this. So she came down to my office one night, actually, and met with 8 of us or so, and what she promised is they would have a process and they would finally fix the Medicare reimbursement rate, which would mean, if we do it rationally, Florida comes down and we go up, and there's a point in the middle there where we're going to be closer together because they are incredibly inefficient providers of care down there. I mean, if you go in for an appendectomy, you might spend 5 days in the hospital, even if you don't have complications in Florida. In Oregon, I don't know that it's outpatient, but it's pretty quick in and out. And our costs are way lower per capita for the same procedures. That needs to be fixed. And she did do the first part of it, which is to study the inequities, and said, yeah, what do you know, this doesn't make sense. But part 2, to fix them, never happened. So we still have that issue hanging out there. And then there's a question. We had the administrator of the hospital in Florence say that 30% of his costs are administering paperwork to try and weed through the myriad of health plans that are out there. I mean, any of you talk to your individual doctors and ask how many people do they have to keep on staff to try and figure out how to get you services, and how often your doctor even has to get involved and call up a clerk at an insurance company and say, they really need this medicine, they really need this procedure, And so that's incredibly burdensome and expensive. Medicare, the administrative costs run about between 2 and 3% for Medicare. And for private insurance companies, administrative costs, sales and marketing run about 26%, essentially wasted money. And then they put a further burden on the system by complicating it and having the physicians and the hospitals have to hire staff to kind of get through these individual insurance plans. If we had, if we had standardized plans, or looking at an improved Medicare, you had someone make the point, wait a minute, you want people all on Medicare? It's not so good. I said, no, you're right. It's improved Medicare, which would include hearing, vision, and dental, which it doesn't now. There's no real, a lot of seniors have all those needs, but you don't, a few of the Advantage plans will give you those benefits, but not very many, and I think they're relatively expensive to get to those kind of benefits. We're beginning a discussion about a single payer, Medicare for all, whatever you want to call it, in the House. We will hold hearings on it this year. There's been legislation introduced, the Medicare for All bill. I've also introduced a bill to go back to the House bill for the ACA and have a national not-for-profit government-run plan, because I run into way too many people who are in the Oregon Exchange. And I was talking to one small business owner. His premium, he's 50 years old, $1,000 a month for a not great plan with a $6,000 deductible. What kind of insurance is that? Yeah, if he's horribly sick or injured, it'll keep him from going bankrupt, but that's really not much in terms of health care coverage. So we really have to work on that, and it's only gotten worse because of the complications of the Affordable Care Act. There was something called risk cords. The whole idea was the plan says you have to take anybody who comes in to buy your policy, you got to take them. And the actuaries of the private insurance companies go nuts, like, no, we can't do that. We have to know what the possibility is that person is going to get sick, or they have been sick, and we don't want them. Congress said, okay, well, we're going to put this mandate on you, but since we don't want premiums to skyrocket, we want you to keep them as low as possible. And if you find out you've recruited, to your company a group that have excessive losses, we will reimburse you for the excessive losses. Well, the Republicans defunded that 2 years ago. So we've seen a big spike in the premiums under the Affordable Care Act for people who have to buy through the exchanges. So there's some things maybe we can get done to improve it. I don't think we're going to see major changes. The Senate is really not cranking out. We've sent a number of bills to the Senate, election reform bills and other things that Mitch has said not even going to get a hearing. So we'll see what happens. But if the court does repeal the Affordable Care Act, I think something is going to have to happen. We're not going to kick 23 million Americans off their health insurance in one day and not see an incredible outcry and potential collapse of the healthcare system in this country. So we're laying the groundwork by talking about it now, getting people to start thinking about what's the next step after the Affordable Care Act. And this is always a thoughtful group, so I thought it would be a useful presentation for you. So that's it. I'd be happy to take questions. We can use this one for questions. That way I can walk around and oh, that's a good idea.
Okay, we're going to start with Sharon.
Okay, I thought I probably should mention the elephant that's in this room with us. And ask you, I know you haven't had a chance to read the whole report, but just to give us your views on what you think might happen and what you think should happen now that it's been more or less released.
Probably more or less. My colleague Jerry Nadler, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, we've already voted in the House to require that he submit a unredacted report to Congress. Barr has said he's going to give a less redacted report to the Judiciary Committee, not to all the members of Congress. You know, Jerry was reported on the radio today saying that's not adequate. You know, we need the whole report. We need also the investigative materials to go through. You know, it was not as presented by Attorney General Barr. It's not an exoneration. You know, there's a lot of disturbing material in the few snippets I've read and heard about the conduct of the president, but then again, it's not very surprising to me. The question is, did it, you know, there's arguments over the legal points. Obstruction of justice is more likely than collusion. Collusion requires, you can understand intent, and who knows what the intent of President Trump is on a given day. There will be a lot of scrutiny on this by the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee as relates to the Russian angle. And we will see what we unearth. I expect they will try and slow walk or make us go to court to try and get an unredacted copy and to get the investigative materials. We'll see if you know how that works out. So it's a work in progress. Though you know, I know I'm here at the league. I'm not supposed to be particularly political, but we will work on that. And if impeachable offenses are unearthed, it would be our duty to go forward. You know, we know that the Senate would, no matter what we unearth, will not act. So it would be a dead end, and it potentially could have the inadvertent effect of helping to re-elect President Trump, which I don't want. So, you know, I'm bending my efforts to the political side as the legal side, but then again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll leave that up to all my lawyer friends and family to figure that stuff out. No one else. Oh.
I was going to ask a question as I walk across the room. And it's a question about whether or not you can actually get an infrastructure bill done.
Oh, that's an easy one. I kicked off the year, you know, for years we've talked about how underfunded we are, how great the needs are. You know, we've got 47,000 bridges that are structurally deficient on the national highway system, 235,000 need a significant amount of work, and bridge problems accelerate in a geometric way. You wait 2 years and your problem is way worse than it was 2 years ago. So that's a big bill. 40% of the national highway surface system highway is deteriorated to the point we have to rebuild it from the roadbed up, not just resurface it. And then we have a $100 billion backlog to bring transit up to a state of good repair, let alone to begin to build new transit options to help people get out of congestion and stop wasting fuel stuck in traffic. So I had the opportunity to write what would be the first 21st century surface transportation bill. We've really been living off the legacy of Dwight David Eisenhower and the national highway system. The biggest change that's happened since he enacted that, or he signed it and Congress passed it, was when Ronald Reagan added in transit in 1984, recognizing that that had to be those are the economic engines of the country. They're the major urban areas, and they can't be all tied up in congestion, and we need more transit and better transit. We haven't changed the federal gas tax since 1993. It has about half the buying power it had in '93, and we have 3 times as many cars on the road. And trucks and vehicle miles traveled go up every year. The system deteriorates, so we have to do something. We also have to account for climate change. We have to build more resilient infrastructure. We have to build infrastructure that's going to be ready for potentially autonomous vehicles. We need to build the infrastructure itself in ways that are less polluting. There's a way to make concrete that pollutes a lot less. It's a very polluting production process in terms of carbon and other gases. There's a whole host of steps we could take. Plus, I think that we're either going to go to hydrogen fuel cells if we figure out how to make electro biofuels, which are way more efficient than our current biofuels. Ethanol is a total loser. You know, so we've got to look toward that future in writing the bill. The key thing is going to be, can we fund it? And that's the discussion that's ongoing. I've met with the president, I've met with his chief economic advisor, I have met numerous times with his past transportation advisor who was firmly locked into something that even Trump didn't want to do, which is let's privatize the entire system in America, toll everything, and work our way out of that way. I pointed out to him that most of the country isn't profitably tollable. And so that, and particularly the red areas aren't going to be real thrilled about that, and they're still paying gas tax. But his report was reflected again in the president's budget because I think the president's chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, wants to go that way. The president said he doesn't like that, and that's why he didn't include it in the State of the Union. So I am now working with Ivanka Trump to see if we can work this out. But I know she has good access to the president. So.
I wanted to ask you about the Texas case you mentioned that's trying to repeal the ACA. Would you just briefly talk about what the issue is, and if that case results in repealing the ACA, what will happen then?
Well, a lot of attorneys say it's a reach, but they did win in district court. And their argument is, since Congress repealed the penalties for not having insurance, and since Justice Roberts' opinion was based upon the taxation power of Congress, therefore, without people paying penalties, that the ACA is unconstitutional. That's the gist of their argument. And they did win in district court. It's now pending in circuit court, and that's where the Justice Department has weighed in. You know, a large number of states, I believe, including Oregon, have filed on the other side, saying, you know, this is just a specious argument. You know, you never know when you're in the courts, and that they chose, you know, they district shopped, and they found a very conservative district, and you know, we'll see what happens in the circuit. And then, of course, we would end up in the Supreme Court, who's already decided once that it was constitutional, but that was 2 justices ago. So I'm not sure what would come out of there.
I was wondering, why is it that the Senate Majority Leader or the Speaker of the House, why can one individual table legislation? Did not come up for, is that in the Senate rules? Because it's certainly not the Constitution.
Yeah, each body governs itself, and we govern under very different rules. The House has a rules committee which sets the conditions for which any bill goes forward to the floor, whether it can be amended, not amended, and that. And the majority of that committee is appointed by the majority party. So that's the House process. We do have some better rules in terms of we require that things must be germane, and the Senate doesn't have a germaneness rule, so you can attach anything to anything. And in the Senate, the majority leader is the ultimate power under the bizarre rules under which they act. And you also have over there the filibuster. You know, you need 60 votes in the Senate to do anything substantive other than appoint Supreme Court justices and other things like that. You know, that's a very, very high bar. The House is a very simple majority. I think we're doing a better job so far, and it's a little bit more like it used to be when I first came there, where you know, we would offer a diversity of amendments on a bill and just see who won, who didn't win. Because that's maybe you improve the legislation. We do that in committee to improve legislation or fix problems with it. But it's still not an open process, and part of it is we'll see in June. Appropriations bills traditionally have come up under an open amendment process. They have to be germane, but you can offer 1,000 amendments and say, well, I want to cut the bill by 10%. 9.999%, 9.9, and that's happened. Those guys, I think Floyd Flake used to do that. He would offer 20 amendments on appropriations bills that just cut at different levels, and none of them would ever succeed. So at that point, then we maybe go back to the Rules Committee and say, okay, we're going to debate this bill for a limited period of time. So we will experiment again.